Oh, okay. So we're recording. We have our Z is gonna spotlight Tiziano. So we'll see him for the whole presentation. After the presentation is over, we'll edit the video and oh, I'm spotlighted also. Hi. We'll have the video up on YouTube, so you can view it later. And if you know anybody who missed the program that wants to see it, it'll be available. So I'd like to welcome Tiziano da Sena tonight to do this program, My Life, the Importance of Writing a Memoir. This is actually the third program that Tiziano has done with the Yonkers Public Library just in the past, I guess, month. It's been pretty quick. One of the other programs that he did with us was called The World is an Impression. Actually, the title of the book that Tiziano wrote also about his father, Emilio da Sena, the artist. That is available on the Yonkers Public Library YouTube channel. So if you haven't seen that, I encourage you to take a look. It was an excellent program. Tiziano did a second program with us in this one was actually in person at the Crestwood Library of Yonkers Public Library, and that was on. It was related to a collection of anthologies that he edited called A Feast of Narrative, 3 volumes. So we got to meet with Tiziano and also a couple of the authors that contributed to those collections. So those are some books that Tiziano has written or contributed to that you should check out. I want to also just mention that Tiziano has won numerous awards for his writing. His works have appeared in over 100 magazines and anthologies in Italy, France, Greece, Canada, Switzerland, and the United States. And Tiziano is the founder and editor-in-chief of 2 magazines, Opera My Love and Opera Amor Mio, both founded in Yonkers. And he has been the editorial director of Idea magazine since 1990. So thank you again for joining us, Tiziano, and for doing this presentation. And I am Phil Pajali, by the way, a librarian at the Yonkers Public Library. And I'm going to pass the microphone over to Tiziano. So thank you.
Thank you. Well, this is about writing memoirs, but there is a lot of confusion out there because people think of memoir as a standard autobiographical book, the story of my life. And that's not necessarily so. But beside that, there is an aspect, a relevance of leaving information about your life, which goes beyond writing books in itself. You want to leave it to your descendants or to society at large. And that's something that needs to be decided based upon certain concepts. But the moment you determine whether you feel that your life or your parents' life or your husband or wife lives or your children's life or people that are relevant to you or they've been relevant in your life, and you want to leave those traces to either the family or the society at large, then you go on to the next step, which, why would you want to do it and how you're going to do it. But what is the reason for leaving all this information behind? Well, one of the things that we notice, and you can notice because of the internet and globalization and the society of today, is that we are one thing that is disappearing is oral tradition. If you recollect, if people that are over 50 can recollect that when they used to meet with the grandparents and the aunts and the uncles, regardless of whatever their ethnic background was, there was always some kind of storytelling. the grandmother or the uncles or the aunt would come and tell you, oh, my grandmother or my uncle or my father did this. He was in World War I, and I remember my father was telling me stories that belonged to before the unification of Italy, because unification of Italy occurred in 1861 to 1870, depending upon how you look at it. But he was talking, my grandparents were born in 1863. So he was talking about these grandparents, and he's talking about different times, different centuries, 2 centuries before now. So all these stories, they used to be carried on by oral manner. So they were told, and they were retained in the family, and people knew that. It's not happening anymore. We are bombarded with information. We all have this information about the deodorant and how to eat this and how to travel, and we are losing is the information of our own roots, of our own families, of what is really important for us. We don't realize it at times because we're so almost like confused by the amount of information through the television and I don't know if people listen to radio anymore, because I don't, but to radios and the newspapers and the online the websites, they give you continuous information, and 99.9% of it is useless to begin with. But regardless of that, what it does, it takes space in your brain, and it's given fact that your brain can store so much and no more. So allow some part of your brain to store family traditions, regardless of everything else. Now, another thing that is happening because of globalization is that family members tend to leave, and they live far away from you. So you don't have the opportunity to exchange this information anymore. So regardless of whether you would want to do an oral tradition, it's very hard to do. Yeah, you can Zoom it, but it's not exactly the same. You need the right atmosphere. It used to be, a fireplace, and they used to sit down and eat, chestnut and talk about old times. It's not happening anymore. Why is it so important that we retain this information? The heritage and the roots are what makes you really, and what makes your family, what you really are. We after all, if you look at yourself and you try to be introspective for a moment, we are going to be just memories. After we're gone, we're just memories. So the people before us are just memories. You remember your grandmother, if you were blessed to have them around, and your uncles and your aunts, and you tell these stories between you and your partner and your children. But the societal reference, it's important that to have these roots, that this search for heritage, it's important well beyond what the advertisement does. So it's important, it's important to be Italian because I'm Italian. No, it's not even that. It's important because your roots are you. You're nothing else but roots. Whether you are Italian, Irish, Japanese, African, it doesn't matter. Your roots are you, and you want to transmit this information to the people that are around you, or to your friends, family, and or in this case, it could be also to society at large. What does that mean, society at large? That means instead of creating what they call a diary, you can create something which is a biography, an autobiography. Depends who you want to talk about. All right, now the question that arises really is that whether you want to write a memoir, you want to talk about yourself, or you want to talk about yourself in a different way, in a fictionalized way, because there are many items that you have to examine before deciding whether you want to write a memoir one way or the other. one thing that you have to remember, the main item is the relevance of your story. In few words, if you were, well, we have a couple of writers listening to us, so their story is already very complicated by per se, just because they are writers of the fantasy, and therefore their brain is always working in a very different manner than the average person does. Because when you go in the store, you start to observe things and you elaborate facts all the time, and this is what a writer does. But because of that, your story in itself, it's relevant, but not everybody feels that their story is relevant, or their parents' story, because it doesn't have to be about you. It's about your heritage, your roots. The memoir, it's not only about you, it's about your niche, your environment around you, right? Okay, so the relevance of your story is an important thing. Now, what do I mean by that? Writers apart, the average person has a regular job, blue collar or white collar. You may be a doctor, you may be an airline pilot. Now, in every story, in every line of work, there are very interesting aspects. We don't realize it until you talk to people and you oh wow, I didn't know that. Oh, wow, that's really interesting. And you do have a relevance in every story. The important thing is to find it, because we so accustomed to our own life that it's very hard at times to realize how important certain things are that we do, because we are used to them. So if you're an airline pilot, it's normal for you to, to be told by the tower, you cannot land, you got to go around 15 times because we have some technical problems on and to you, it's a normal thing. But when you describe it to people, that is not a normal story. Now, you could create a very interesting story by the details of what you think it's your regular life. And besides that, you have the fact that in everybody's life, there are occurrences, whether tragedies or dramas or particular situations that we lived. I can tell you my own. I escaped a terrorist attack by 15 minutes in Germany. I escaped a terrorist attack in Israel by 3 hours. Now, when you think back at these items, then your life becomes very interesting to tell. If you live them at the moment, they're just annoyances of life. So that's what I mean by looking at the relevance of your story. Now, when I say your story, let's stop there for a moment. It doesn't have to be about you. It could be about a family member. For example, if your father was a soldier in World War I, or a soldier in Korea, or your grandfather was a soldier in World War I would say probably. But your father could be a soldier in Korea or in Vietnam, and he has stories, and he's still around to tell you this story. And I will give you an example of a book that does that. I have examples of all these variants on biographies. So that is something that it's your decision, whether it's about you, whether it's about your family, whether it's about another member of your family. But it still is a memoir. Okay. Now the other item, and it's very important now, I know I have some writers here on this Zoom meeting, so they don't really have to be concerned so much with this, but it's knowledge of writing. So whether you feel that you are capable of write in a manner that is going to be interesting, whether you decide to publish or not. So if you don't decide to publish and you do it for your grandchildren, which is fine, you still want it interesting. You don't want it to sound like, some police report, this happened at this time and this happened at that time and this happened at that time. No, it doesn't work like that. So knowledge of writing, it's an essence. So when you decide on which route to take, on writing the memoir, you have to be sincere to yourself and examine whether you have enough knowledge to write it yourself, or, and I give you different options, and later on, but that's something that has to be decided. Now, another thing that has to be it's very important actually, is whether you want to keep some of the information, whether it's about you or your family, sheltered due to its sensitive content. What do I mean? Well, let's say you want to talk about your family, not you. You want to talk about your family, and you know that your uncle came in this country illegally, he stayed illegally, he's still an illegal. Now, you might not want to publish a book and advertise it that way. So you will have to find a way to either use different names, and I will give you different options afterward, but you have to realize if your grandfather was a serial killer, it's an interesting story. But you might not want to say it was your grandfather. You might just want to make it to a novel. This is the aspect that you have to confront in this. And now the other thing, and this is very important, and it's one of the basic facts, is whether you want it to be published or you want to be kept as a diary for the family. And that is something that is so much of a personal choice, but I believe that everybody should write a memoir, whether you want to leave it to the grandchildren or to the nieces and nephews and leave it as a family history, that's great, or whether you want to publish it, and then there's different ways to go publish it, that's great too. It doesn't have to be published, and it doesn't have to be not published. So those are two choices, and you should base those choices on the fact that we're talking about, whether you want to divulge all this information, whether you want to divulge it with the proper names, or whether you want to divulge it with fake names. These are important things that you have to examine, so that your decisions are going to be orderly, and then you're not going to back out after you spend 6 months preparing your book or your diary. Now, how do you collect information? Well, this is based on two facts, whether it's about you or whether it's about family member. Now, when it's about you, I would say you know how to collect your own information. If you don't by now, then you might not be able to write a book, or even live in a diary. You should know if you have cut out on magazines and articles that were written about you, maybe not because you're a famous person, but maybe because you just happened to be that day. I remember my son was they took a picture of my son while he was apparently shoveling snow in Riverdale, in the Bronx. He never shoveled snow. He was a kid. That day, he came out, and I was shoveling snow, and the guy said, "Can we take a picture of the kid shoveling snow?" And that's how he went in the papers. But these things are important, so you can be in the paper even if you didn't do anything important, but anything relevant to them. At the moment. But there are things in your life, certificates, documentations, letters, all these documents that could be enlivening, give life to a book or to a story. They got to be stored. Okay, so how do you store this? There are two ways. One is the physical storage, and this depends what it is again. And one is to scan it and keep it digitally. Okay, we'll go over how to store digitally in the proper manner, because it seems like an easy thing, but it turns out to be a very complicated manner if you don't do it right from the beginning. Because when files start to accumulate, it's very hard to find them. As you know, I'm sure if you're familiar with computer work, it's very easy to lose file, and now 6 months after you work, it says, that file, what was the name of that file? That is the problem. So there is a way to do it to avoid this. Now, Another thing is that if it's not about you, keeping documentation becomes a little more delicate, which means that you have to not only keep documentation, but you also to have to verify information. What I mean is that I edited a book for someone who wrote about the mother and the aunt. And obviously the story was told to her. Unfortunately, when years go by, memories tend to falter a bit. You know, I should know. I forgot my middle name at times, so it's okay. But in the story itself, when I was examining the content, I realized that there was historical errors because the person that was telling the story to the writer, you know, to the daughter, and to the aunt, also to the niece, remember things when she was 5 years old. And you know, when you're 5 years old, you see things from a very low perspective. You're a little bit, you always look up and things, everything seems big, and they might not be accurate historically. So when you hear a story, if the book is not about you, but it's about, let's say, your aunt, and your aunt is 95, and she's going to tell you the stories. There are certain things, certain items, when she tells you the stories of this particular town that is in the province of such and such city in Italy. Fine, sounds great. Guess what? They moved the provinces in the meanwhile. In Italy, they shifted all the provinces. So it is not in that province. So if people look for that town, they're not going to find it. So it's up to you to verify the information if it's given to you by a relative. So it's something that is quite important, because if it's a book that is going to be a straight memoir of this person, it's essential that you verify every information, because you don't want to be found at fault with information in that. If it's a novel, you can get away a little more, because so what? There is a mistake. People are not going to catch it. They're not going to verify because they don't know who the person in the story is. It's a fake story in a way. Even though it's a real story, it became a fake story. So those details do not matter as much. But if it's a true biography, verification of the information, it's essential. Now, given that, let's say you decided to write a memoir, and we'll decide which type of memoir in a moment, but the most important thing that you do, besides putting together the information and the data, is to write an outline of the story. Now, it can always be expanded later on, but you need an outline. You say, well, I know let's say it's about you. I know my love story. It's not true. I can tell you one thing. You find yourself speaking to people. And let's say to your husband, to your wife, to your friend, to your children, and you tell something that happened to you 10 years before. And they correct you because you said, oh, this happened in Atlanta. They say, no, it wasn't Atlanta, it was Denver. Oh, yeah, you're right. So writing an outline is going to allow you to write, first of all, the basic steps of the biography, whether it's autobiography or not, the memoir, and it will allow you to write the reference points, whether geographic or years-wise, that can be verified later on. Because even though it's our memories or it's the memories of people close to you, there might be mistakes. There might be things that you do not recollect properly. And by writing an outline, you allow yourself to structure it in a way that you can verify later on. And the outline doesn't have to be a long thing, because it can be expanded. Because then when you decide that you're going to talk about when you were a kid, you're going to say, I'm going to talk about when I was a kid. And then when I'm going to talk about when I was an adolescent, and then my years in college, or my school years. And then when I became a doctor, what my first years in the practice, whatever that is, the structure is. And then you're going to find yourself expanding this because it says, wait a minute, my school years, but wait a minute, I went to boarding school and then I went to 3 different colleges. So there are different stories. 2 of them, they were living and, I was living at home, and one instead is in different cities. So there are different chapters of your life, even though it seems at first, because it becomes a little foggy. The memories with the years become a little foggy. They seem to be just a portion of your life, a group of years. In reality, they are independent tassels in a puzzle, because your years that spent in a particular college from which to which you attended from home, they are not going to be the same as if you went to Yale or you went to Oxford. You went to a different city or different country to study. So all these are important in the outline of the story, because then you can expand them, right? But as long as you got the outline, not a problem. Now, the other thing is that books are beautiful. We know books are beautiful. And biographies are interesting, or can be interesting if written properly, but you should have illustrations. Especially about biography. You're reading about Joko Kutza. The author is Joko Kutza. Okay? So now he's writing his story, and he's telling the story, and he's describing, and he's very good at describing. He's a very good writer. He's describing his grandfather. That's great. But if you also have a picture of the grandfather, that is going to give you an extra point for the reader, because now you can verify in front of you. It's like when you read an historical book about Garibaldi. Garibaldi is great, but when you see the man, it says, "Oh wow, he was a heck of a man." I mean, you can perspire from the picture. You can get the energy of the person, and this is important to have the illustrations. Okay, so hopefully, if it's about you, definitely you're going to have pictures of yourself and places you went. Unfortunately, pictures that were taken 50, 60 years ago, as I went through this because of my father's book, tend to become pink. Okay, pink is a great color, but now when you try to print and publish pictures, color pictures in a book, so if you want to make a color pictures book, it's not a good thing. Even if you want to make it black and white, you will need to know how to correct them, or you get somebody professional to correct the images. Usually the publisher does that for you. Some publishers, unfortunately, don't do that, which I classify them as non-publisher, because if you have a publisher that does not correct your pictures, then you might as well self-publish. It doesn't make any difference. The publisher should be able to find a way to make the pictures pleasant, clear, even if they're not, even if the pictures from 60 years ago. The important thing, though, if you have good pictures, is to scan them in high resolution. Don't send low resolution to a publisher if you want to publish, because you're going to get, if you excuse me the expression, a crappy product. The picture is going to look like old pixelated, expanded. So it's not anything you want to, right? And then there's another item now. So let's say you choose and you find yourself with 200 pictures of your life. There's too many. You don't want 200 pictures. That is not anymore a book. It's an illustrated book, a very illustrated book with very little text at this point. Or it's a 600 pages book, which you want to try to avoid unless you're Napoleon Bonaparte. Okay? So you have to do a selection, the relevance of the images to the story. Whether you like your Aunt Madalena from the story, if she's not represented well in the story, if she's not presented in the story, she's just a person that was named once in the story, you don't need a picture of her. But if you do have a person like your grandfather who appears in 7 of the chapters of your book, then you better have a picture of your grandfather. Now, these things are so logical, but somehow I picked up books where I'm looking at the pictures and I say, why is the picture in here? I don't understand why is this picture is in the book when we would need pictures of this character in the book or that character or that particular place. So it's important that you evaluate the relevance to the story. The moment you have the pictures chosen, correct it if you need to, digitize, which you need them for the publisher if you decide to publish. If you don't decide to publish, don't forget, you can always put this text and pictures in a book and print it by the photographer, CVS and all that. So you still need to make pictures decent so that it becomes, so that grandchildren, when they pick up the book, they appreciate and they enjoy. So now you need to create a structured directory of the pictures. For you to find the pictures, I would suggest both the pictures and the files to give a name that is going to be at the beginning of the name of the file. So for example, you can write Memoir, picture 1, Memoir, picture 2, or Memoir, picture 1, grandfather. Now, Memoir, file 1, Memoir, document 1, birth certificate. Why am I telling you this? Because this way, even though you're going to put it in a directory for the book or for the whatever the diary is, this way you're going to be able to retrace. If you erroneously, and that happens in today's world with the computers, it happens actually quite often. If you erroneously put those files or those pictures in the wrong directory. Now, if you named it Memoir, as soon as you put it in the search, all the Memoir pictures and the documents come up, and you can see if it's in the wrong directories and move it back to where it belongs. That's one thing. And the other item is that you will allow you to create a structure by chapter, if you're going to publish the book, but even if you don't, by diary, a structure of the pictures. So the pictures that belong in your early life, you're going to make Memoir, picture 1, early life, whatever it is, my early years, whatever you want the name to be, and you store it in that kind of directory. This way, you're going to be able to retrieve them, because that's something that when you have a lot of pictures and or documents, it's easy to lose. Okay, now the other item is whether you want to write the memoir yourself or find an author to assist you. You have to remember what the goals of the memoirs are. And this is this is one of the most relevant points. Do you want this memoir for your family or for the public at large? And because this kind of dichotomy, this splitting will decide whether you need somebody else to help you or whether you can do it yourself, regardless of your preparation. So you have to know exactly, and again, let's going back one step. How do you decide that? First of all, do you want the whole world to know that your grandfather was a serial killer? Maybe not. Okay. Do you care about it? Maybe you don't care. So I actually read the book by, I don't remember the title of the book, but he was a son of a mobster. And his father is well known because he used to cut up people and put them in cans and melt them and put them in the field. Now, he describes all this because he discovered this in the later years when he was already an adult. But his father, to him, was a great father. It turned out to be that he knew how to behave at home. It was one of those people that, just like a serial killer, they have two different personalities. One is the one at home, where there is great father, great husband, and then the other one, where you have a. So now the child, the son, didn't care about writing about the father. Besides that, the father was in all the papers, because he was arrested and I believe now he's dead. They actually made a movie about him, but the son didn't care about it. But generally speaking, 95% of the people don't want to, for the people outside, the public at large, to discover certain things. So keep that in mind. Now, the other one is the ability to write. Can you write yourself? That's something else. Now, this is whether you should publish it or not, right? The financial involvement. Unless you're a great writer and you find Simon & Schuster agent by mistake on a train, it's very hard to get to a large publisher. I tell you, unless you're a politician and you cheat on the election, then it's okay. It's easy to find them. But the average person, the average writer, will not find easily a contact within a large or even a middle publisher, mid-sized publisher. So there might be some financial involvement. So that's something that you have to decide. I can't make any suggestion. I can tell you what routes not to take, but I cannot tell you whether you should spend money or not. That's your own choice. And the other thing is that my suggestion is, even if you do it for the family, is find somebody, if you're not a professional writer, especially, is to edit it. Even if you're a professional writer, if you're going to publish it, you need an editor. Even if you decide to self-publish it, you need an editor. I can tell you, I can see the mistakes in everybody else's writing, not in my own. And I believe, Louisa, correct me if I'm wrong, Betty, you both writers, isn't that true? You can read your writing 20 times, you're not going to see there's a misspelled word in there. The editor picks it up in a second. Why? Because it's not their writing. There is no emotional involvement in the story, and therefore you see it as it is. Okay? So editing is an essential thing if you publish it, and it's a suggested thing if you don't and you're not a writer. If you're not a writer and you write the memoirs, the diary for your family to keep, make maybe somebody else who has writing experience read it, unless you want to keep it completely private. Maybe a family member, maybe a grandchild, or a friend of your son or your daughter who has an English degree and can take a look at it and say, is it all right? Not that you want to you're not trying to be Ernest Hemingway, but you want to make sure that when they read it, they don't smile too many times for the wrong reason. They smile because it's a nice story, and that's it, Now, the other thing is whether, if you want to publish your memoir or novel, however it is whether you want to do self-publishing, a small publisher. I mean, we're not going to go into mid-sized publishers because they're not relevant in this case, and the large publisher. Given the chance that you'll never find a large publisher, you have better chance to be stricken by lightning than to find a large publisher. And I'm trying to be positive. I mean, publisher the other day, I believe the number one publisher was trying to buy number two publisher for $2.7 billion. They don't care about me and you. They only care about the big names. They only care about the people that are in the entertainment business. And now, there are people that do publish on their own or through a small publisher that they are picked up by a large publisher later on, because casually they see the book and they see that there is talent and promise. But generally speaking, a large publisher is out of the world, of the case. Now, the choice between self-publishing and a small publishing company. I'm a small publisher, so I can tell you what the problem is with self-publishing. Self-publishing is ideal if you know to market your book, you are an artist and you can make your own cover, or your friends or your husband or wife is an artist and they know how to make your own cover. You know how to paginate the book on your own. You went through a course to paginate books, and even though you may not be perfect, you may do a nice pagination. I've seen self-published books that turn you off just by looking at the cover. It shouldn't be like that. The book should entice you to be picked up. But how do you do that? You get a professional to design the cover. You do not attempt to do things that you don't know how to do, because it's not your job. I'm not saying you can't do it. You can. Do I suggest it? No. From what my own experience, I actually have one of the writers that did self-publishing, and then we republished the book. And when you put the two books next to each other, you realize how better of a choice was to self-publish in that case. Now, the other problem with the self-publishing is that it seems to be the financially more savvy decision. But if you want to self-publish and you really want to make a nice book, you're going to need to find somebody to design the cover and prepare it for you. Unless you have really know how to do it, it doesn't really work well. The other thing is that you would need somebody to paginate, unless you don't care about how it looks inside. And the editing. I tell you one thing, if you get an editor and you self-publish, and I don't mean a publisher, if you get somebody to edit your book and you self-publish, it costs you 3 times as much as going to a small publisher. Because editors charge, what, $8 per page? Something like that. So you're spending more editing than you would be involved with a small publisher. So if you want a good product, it doesn't really work. Unfortunately, there is another aspect in a small publishers that is negative also. Not all small publishers are honest and give you what they're supposed to be giving you. They tell you they do editing. It's not true. They do spell check. You don't need them to do spell check. You can do it with Word, Microsoft Word. You need somebody to edit it. Also, spell check with Microsoft Word, the way they do it, most of them, it's not really accurate, because you may have written a word that is not understood by the program. They think it's okay the way it's spelled, but it's not the right word. So to do it the proper way is to do it with a small publisher, but you have to be very picky and go by recommendations to go small publisher, so you don't find yourself with somebody that drains your money and gives you a book that looks like you self-published. At that point, you self-publish it. You solve the problem, okay? So those are the basic items that you should remember. Now, the point about memoirs, the kind of memoirs that we're talking about. For example, the first example would be a really true memoir, an autobiography. Here he goes. This person, here goes. Oh, let me see if we can make it. Oh, Gilda promised me. Can you see it? Okay. Now this is Gilda Promised Me, a memoir by Cavaliere, Gilda Battaglia Balderson. She had a great life. As you can see, it's a very thick book. She went through her life story. It's what they call a 3-dimensional journey of a universal woman. She was in charge of the education department of a county in New Jersey when racial integration was applied. We're talking about the 50s. She has been a writer, a college professor. She started studying to become a nurse because both of her father and mother, both of her parents were doctors. So she was supposed to become a registered nurse. It turned out to be that she became a teacher. Now she was a movie star in Mexico. She won Miss Mexico. She was part of so many other activities in Mexico. Besides, she was the #1 advertising model in Mexico when she was young. And then she came back home and she started teaching. She taught Spanish. even though her major was Italian. So she had a very interesting life. Now that is something that will bring you to write a memoir, a simple, straight memoir. That's very simple. There is nothing in here that is not true. Everything is verified. Everything is documented, and it's a great memoir. But that's not the only way you can write a memoir. So here goes a memoir that was written as a, here goes, George Washing Machine, Portable and Submarine Races. Now this gentleman that wrote, as you can see in the picture, that is actually his father. He's alive still. And this is a collection of stories about the interaction between him and his father and his mother, his father and other people throughout his life. So he rewrote these stories. He heard them from his father and he rewrote them. And they're actually comedic. They're very funny. They're hilarious. Because his father came to the United States, and the reason that it's called George Washing Machine is because when he was learning English and the kids were born here, and he, instead of say George Washington, he used to say George Washing Machine. So that was his the major point that he was making, is that it didn't matter at the end of the story. At the end of the story, he wrote beautiful stories that are not necessarily entwined in a continuous memoir like the first one I showed you, but it's still a memoir. It does give. It starts when his father meets his mother, and he ends now. So it does go through all his years, but instead of going through all the details of his life, he took snapshots of his life. So this is another way of doing it, and you can do it for yourself. So George Washing Machine, really, it's about looking at a person's life, not anymore as a continuous memoir, as a continuous story, but as a series of snapshots. And it's easy to do it. You can tell, oh, now you can actually write short stories, and all these short stories altogether make a memoir. Another way of doing it.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Who is the author of the book?
The author of the book is Mike Cutillo. He is the editor of the New York State Grand Lodge magazine, which is Golden Lion, and he's also the editor of Geneva Times, upstate New York.
Okay, thank you.
Now, one other thing we were talking about the presentation was this book, The World as an Impression. Now, this is another approach. Now, this was my father. My father was an artist. Now, I am writing a memoir of him, and it's going to be 500 pages memoir with 500 pictures inside. It's going to be a very expensive book. But this was just a section of his life, not a chronological section, not a particular set of years, but a particular set of works. Because as an artist, he painted landscapes, and he also painted portraits and other stuff. So I just took the landscapes and I examined them, and I made it a memoir in the sense that I'm going through the years of his life, only in reference to these aspects of the person in the story, in the book. So you can do that even by yourself. You can look at a particular aspect of your life, which could be your work, or maybe your hobbies, or maybe your volunteering, and you just go over that and you make it a story unto itself, that it's not a complete memoir of your life, but it's still a memoir. It still represents you, or whoever the person is that you want to represent, your father, your mother, whoever it is. Now, talking about fathers and mothers, here goes a book which I mentioned before, not the name. This is by Mariana Biazzo Randazzo. It's given away, the rest of the story. What is this book about? This is the story of her aunt and also of her mother somehow, but mostly of her aunt. She was Sicilian, and she's, she just passed away last year, actually. She was taken away from her house when she was 5 years old and given to an aunt. Now, her parents were well off in Sicily. The father worked in a hospital. He was in charge. He was a manager in a hospital. We're talking about fascist time, fascist era. So a very delicate period. And she was given away to this aunt who was extremely poor. And because of that, she suffered. She basically was hungry. She saw the uncle mistreating, physically abusing the aunt, abusing his dog in a terrible manner. And she suffered through all these years until she was 14 when she was given back to the family. Now, we still don't know why this happened. They said it's something in the traditions. Apparently, the aunt was present when she was born. And because of the aunt's presence, she made it. Otherwise, she would have died. So the aunt not having any children, it was like a gift, a borrowed gift to give to the aunt. Now, to make sure that there was accuracy in the story, beside what was given to her, this writer decided to make it a novel. So this is a novel, but it's based on a true story. Remember when you see a movie or you read a book and it says based on a true story, which means that the story behind the book or the case of movies, it's true, but some facts are being added to the story. Are these details essential to the story? No. They are what they call decorations, which means that if you are going to tell the story about, like in this case, about the fascist era and when the German soldiers invaded Sicily and the bombings and so on and so forth, you are going according to a story that was told to you by someone who was 5 at the time. So you're going to have to embellish the description of the landscape, the description of the people around. Maybe you put characters that don't really belong in the story. They might have been there, but that you give them a name and a physical description that is not accurate, but you do that to enrich the book, to make it more readable. Again, not to make it become like a police report, not to make it become like fact 1, fact 2, fact 3. You enrich it. But now, because you are talking about a period in which you did not live, and the person that lived has memories that can be a little bit incorrect to certain details, you embellish it. Now you make it a novel based on a true story. So that's a completely different approach, right? So the facts are true. All the facts in the story are true. All the occurrences are true, but you're embellishing the descriptions. Now, the last way of doing it is to still do a novel. Here it goes. Leo Vadala. This is a great book too. It's a big book. Some Grief, Some Joy by Leo Vadala. Now, it's a big book. It's as big as Gilda promised me, and it's a novel. The truth is that about 70% of the story in the book, it's true. It's autobiographical. The writer felt that although his life would be as an immigrant, he became a bank manager. He came when he was a young man. He went to college here, became a bank manager, a very interesting story. But there was no drama in his life. He felt he needed something, so he added a tragedy in the story that never occurred. So this does not say it's based on a true story, but in reality, it is based on a true story. Unfortunately, not all the story is true. So you can write your memoir, add some spice, some pepper and salt here and there. Make sure that you don't say it's an autobiography, because it is not. So you make it a novel. So this is all the different approaches: a memoir by short stories, a memoir following certain aspects of your life, a novel based on a true story, and an actual novel. So you have so many ways of going about it, especially if it's an autobiography kind. Anyway, I will pass the word to Mr. Pujali. If you want to make a Q&A, if anybody's interested, has questions about what I said.
Well, before we begin, Tiziano, you mentioned a book earlier about, it was written by the son of a mafia assassin. I'm just going to take a guess here. Was it For the Sins of My Father by Albert de
That
Meo?
is correct. That is correct.
Right.
And I will tell you one thing: I don't like mobster books, and I enjoyed that book because it was so photographic. Like, everything in the book was so clear and so well described. As much as it's a disturbing story, it was a very well written story. He's a stockbroker, the son, right now. So it's very, very interesting story.
Okay, I'd like to open the floor to questions. You can unmute yourself and ask Tiziano a question, or you can type it in the chat and I will read it.
Tiziano, ciao, buonasera.
Buonasera.
I wanted to know about when you're writing, let's say, a memoir,
yes,
of any category or any subcategory. What about the process of legally vetting the book? Because wouldn't there be people that might, pop out of nowhere and say, you portrayed me in a negative light and I want to sue you? Something along those lines.
Absolutely.
That was my question.
That was one of the reasons Given Away was written that way. Truthfully, the person that wrote Mariana Randazzo knew that one of the characters in the book, which was not a positive character, was still alive. So to make it a true to life biography would have been they weren't concerned about being sued, but there would have been a slap in the face of that person. So to avoid that, she made it into a novel. Now, if you're going to about the court issue, if you write a memoir that is a true biography or autobiography, again, I said you have to verify all the information. You cannot just go about feelings. If you do express feelings about people, you have to say that there are feelings expressed by you. So if you say you didn't like someone because they look like a mobster, it's okay to do that. But if you say that they look like a mobster, it is not okay. So it's a different approach on how to sift through the information that you're using and to give the proper characterization to the people in the book. So if you write facts which can be, people usually are never happy to be described in the book, I can tell you. No matter how nice you talk about them, unless you tell them they're a movie star, everybody says, oh, I'm not like that. But that's pretty normal. If you're concerned from a court point of view, they can only sue you if you are for libel. If you're telling them that they stole something, if you tell them that they're being violent, if you're accusing them of something that is criminal, whether you tell them that you don't like the way they smile, that if they don't like it, you know what they say, tough luck. It doesn't really apply. So yes, but you do have to be careful, especially if you're going to use true names. Most biography, when you go past beyond the immediate family, if you have people that are alive, you try not to use their real names, and you say it in the introduction that you didn't use the proper name of that person. So they did, especially if they're alive. Let's say you describe a city Sicily, like this person in the book. And that person is alive, and you say, Zia Immacolata. The problem is if you say something even not negative, but something that may be not completely okay in the town where she lives, you are crucifying her, and you don't need to. You don't want to. So you create names. It's not so hard. Now, if you're talking about your brother, you don't want to give the improper name to your brother because he's going to say, "What? You don't remember my name?" But if you're talking about distant relatives or neighbors or all that, you can use fake names, and you can tell that as a disclaimer at the beginning of the book.
Thank you. Great presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anybody else?
Yeah, that was more or less my experience when I was teaching writing stories with senior citizens. Sometimes the family would interfere and not let the older person actually read the story out loud. And it was hardly a dramatically terrible story. It might have talked about something early in life. I had a Sicilian woman who had a memory of somebody she had loved before her husband, and her grandson wouldn't let her read the story. So
Yeah, but
it was like family censorship.
Right. But the problem is this, that there is a difference between facts and opinions and feelings. They're three different things. Feelings, you have to explain when you write a story that those are feelings. So you say, I felt uneasy with this person in the room. That doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with them. You felt that way. Okay. Now, opinions are, I personally believe that that person may be a pedophile. I personally believe it. You're not accusing them. I have this feeling, I have this, based on these particular facts, and you explain the facts. I used to stay close to the school when the kids came out. They had no reason for it. I cannot say that he was a pedophile, but yes. Now, and the fact is, he was arrested 3 times for pedophilia. Now, there are 3 different instances. So that's why you write in a book, you have to be concerned whether you are expressing opinions, whether you're expressing feelings, or you are saying, claiming for facts. So facts have to be verified. So you can't say, I think he went to jail. If you don't know that he went to jail, just because your uncle told you that he went to jail, you should verify, because it might have been a gossip. Because they didn't see him for 6 months. He might have gone to work in Switzerland. So it's very important to keep that reality and fantasy separated. And unfortunately, as you know, as we get older, there is a smudging, a fog between reality and fantasy. We remember things that sometimes are not completely accurate. Where there may be, so it's verification. If you're writing an autobiography and you want it to be an autobiography, you have to verify all the facts, even your own facts, because it says, well, on and off, I go back into my in my resume, and people, you guys send me a resume when I do interviews, right? And I find inaccuracies. I don't know what happened. But wait a minute, I couldn't have done that in 1974 because I wasn't there. A small detail, but when you expand the story, these small details may become a big issue, because now you're telling somebody, going back to the going to jail, they went to jail the year that you went to college, but now you put the wrong year, and they can sue you because you said that they went to jail in 1974, but they didn't. They went in 1975. They can sue you on that. So you have to verify facts. It's important, especially when you write as an autobiography, as a true, straight memoir. You have to verify facts. If you write it as short stories, the verification of fact is important, but it's not as important as a straight memoir, because a straight memoir, people will read and try to find mistakes. Because they say, how can that be? And they go through that. I'm sorry, but it's an innate reaction of people. Says, well, I don't remember that. She's talking about Reagan. I don't remember that year he was doing that. So if you're talking about especially things that occurred around you, make sure you verify those facts. Okay?
I should mention that joining us tonight is Westchester County Executive George Latimer, who would like to say a few words.
All right, thank you.
I just wanted to say hello and how much I appreciated the presentation. I've come to Crestwood many times in person. I guess we do it by Zoom now. Outstanding program, very interesting. And as soon as I do a few more things in my life, I'll think about a memoir.
Very good. Keep me in mind. By the way, I have a publication company, so keep me in mind.
Thank you. Marianne, you had a question, right?
Good evening. Thank you so much for a wonderful and inspiring presentation.
You're welcome.
It's very interesting because I'm sure many of the other authors here are gonna nod their heads in agreement with what I'm going to say next. At the time when my mother became impaired and needed a little more looking after, my brother turned to me and said, if you don't write a book about this, you're crazy. So it happened that a writing contest had become available, 500 words. So I wrote this story in play format, 500 words, never expecting it to go anywhere. It got published. That was like setting a match to paper because I wrote it the way it happened. So we gave it a premiere in literally somebody's mansion. And one of the readers was a doctor, and you could see him getting more agitated during the reading. Meanwhile, the reading was only 5 minutes. It's only 500 words. And at the end, we do a little talk back, just as you're doing now. He literally slams his hand on the table and he's like, no way did this happen this way. No way was that said. I said, I'm telling you, the way it happened is the way I wrote it because I was writing it as it happened. The due date for it was December. The events that took place were the first week of December. All of that unfolded in a week, and all I did was just tell the story. But it's very interesting the way family perceives, the way people who have been in these situations perceive it. I mean, I thought it was just going to be a little piece and a little simple reading, and it was the reactions have been crazy.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to give an example of.
Yeah.
This was a 90-year-old woman telling a story about a man she was in love with, and she was not allowed to say it because her family found that terrible. Right. You had nobody before your husband, nobody. So that was the end of it. It ruined the whole thing.
Well, that is you're right about that. That's why when you write any kind of story that are true stories, whether it's a memoir or you're talking about somebody else, you have to keep in mind that somebody may be riled up, may be upset because within the story, we don't realize we do that. But within the story, they are part of the story structure that are really based on opinion and feelings. We don't realize that. And for example, if you're talking about something that is occurring in a particular period and you make a comment about a political figure of the moment, it's your personal comment, even though it may be true to the facts. There are people that you may dislike that person and you make political comment. It's not a judgment, it's something that occurred, but people will read between lines and get irritated at that. So that is a danger with any kind of storytelling. So it's somebody's going to get irritated and annoyed.
Yep.
Especially talking about Mr. Latimer, especially if you're a politician, somebody's definitely going to get irritated at you when you write. So it's a normal procedure. So expect some of that, but you don't want to find yourself at fault in writing something that is not true because it's just an opinion or a feeling. That is you have a responsibility for verification. And also when you're talking about people around you that are not family related, you know, again, political figures or entertainers, whatever it is, keep in mind when you make a statement that if it's an opinion, that it tells that it's an opinion. If it's a feeling, it tells that it's a feeling. Don't make statements like so and so is like that. It's not up to you to say that. You think so and so is like that. You feel like that. So it's very important to keep those two items very separated. Feeling and reality are two different things. Now, your feelings and your opinions may be based 99.9% of reality or even 100% of reality, but that does not mean anything. You have to be careful to express when it's a feeling or an opinion, and it's not verified. Again, somebody, you know, is a serial killer and they find him guilty, you verify that, you don't have to worry about it. But when you may express feelings about or opinions about the way they behave, you have to be careful that they are tied to real facts. So that's all it is. When it comes to family, there will be people that will get annoyed when you write an autobiography. And there will be some uncles or aunts that you may not like when you were a kid because they give you a boot in the back, you know. They're not going to like it. So my suggestion is, if you go outside of the immediate family, use fake names, and you tell at the beginning that you are not using the real name. This way you don't embarrass yourself, and even though the person will recognize themselves, they cannot accuse you of anything, and they will not get annoyed at you because they know that you didn't use their name. That's all it is. So it's something to be careful. And there is so much more in writing memoir that is involved. You know, if you ever decide to write a memoir and you decide, I am available for consultation, free consultation. I give free suggestions. I do it for passions. I'm not here to make money. My partner disagrees with me, but I'm not here to make money. It's, if you have questions, please, you know, to the, you know, when this movie will be, you know, published to the YouTube, there will be my address, my email address, so you can contact me if you have any questions. I'm more than glad to answer. Okay.
Can we take one more question, Tiziano? Okay. Dallas wrote something in the chat. What do you think is the amount of creative liberty that can be taken when writing a memoir? If a certain scene is pivotal to a story but seems very ordinary to a reader, do you think certain details should be altered to keep the reader's interest?
Okay, it can be, it should be actually, if it doesn't alter the pace of the story, the true facts of the story. So if you're going to describe an occurrence in, let's go back to Sicily for a moment, because that's an interesting place to be. Okay, you go to Sicily for a moment. You went there because you were an exchange student and you had a love affair, and you're describing this, and it just happened that you had a love affair in a small town, which is not very descriptive. It's not a particularly pretty towns of Sicily. There are some, like every region, there's some pretty towns, and some towns are blah, right? So you happen to have a love affair in a blah town. When you describe it and you can add things that you have seen in the landscaping, maybe on a trip there, instead of describing that town, which is a blah town. So you make that love encounter more lively without really changing the story. You can't change. You can't say if you met in Palermo, you can't say you met in Syracuse. No, that doesn't work. That's not being true to the story. But you can be true to the story, and yes, embellish. You should embellish. Again, you don't want your story to become a police report. This happened at this time, and then this happened at that time, and this. Nobody wants to read that. Nobody's interested. So you do want to embellish. How much is as much as you can without changing the story. So when you describe clothing, the hand of the person, the place where you were, the day, You can embellish as much as you want to. That's the beauty of writing. You don't have to be concerned with that. As long as the story does not change, you can do that. Does that answer your questions? Please text yes or no. It's like
she says it does. Thank you.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
Very
Thank
happy
you
with
for asking the question, Dallas.
Thank you, Don.
Okay, I think we can wrap it up. What do you think, Tiziana?
Yes, yes, we can. So my suggestion again, if you have any questions, please contact me. If you do want to know how to publish, regardless of this, to publish any story you write, I can give you information, whether to us or to other means. I'm not trying to sell my company to you, but we are a publisher. We are a publisher, a small publisher. We publish quite a few books actually, and we are what they call passionate publishers, which means we publish books that are worth reading and viewing. As you saw, the covers of our books are very beautiful. We use a graphic artist that is very talented, and we're going through all these all this questioning about the structure of the pagination. And now we're doing a book, for example, we're doing Art Deco in every page because there are no illustrations that we can use in the book. So there's many ways to go. But if you ever want to decide to publish, you can contact me anytime. Whether you use this or not, that's not relevant. I can give you information. I can give you all the information you want. Now, one thing to close. Another aspect. Remember I said about my father's book? Well, there's another way of looking at the book, which is this. This, it's an historical book. Okay. All right. Federico Tosti, poeta anti-regime. He was an anti-fascist poet. Now, what is this book about? The book, it's about a very small period of his life, about 10 years. The 5 years before the war, World War II, and the years of the war, in which the author wrote poems against the regime, the fascist regime, and against the Nazi. And he used to hide them in a metal box on a mountain. He was on his spare time. He was an alpine guide, so he used to do that. Now, why did I choose this? I happen to have met this author when he was 100 years old. He lived until 104, and I was a guest of this house in the mountains near to where he used to hide these poems. So this is a biography only of a clip, of a snapshot of a period of a person's life, because if you write a biography of his whole life, it will be a very complicated and long book. He did a lot of things. So you can actually choose either a particular period or a particular aspect of a person's life, or whether your life, let's say, Luisa, with your years in Jamaica, right? Or your years in New York, or you use, like you choose a particular period, and that's what you're going to focus on, and that's what you can write a memoir on. So that's something I didn't touch before, but that's something important too. You can also have that. You also have that option. So there's a lot of ways to approach the subject of memoirs. To conclude, you can do it as a true memoir. You can do it as a novel. You can do it as a collection of short stories, or you can do it as a memoir focused on a particular period, whether of you or a person close to you. You say, but this poet, why is he close to me? I just met him when he was 100. Well, actually, he wrote some articles for my magazine before I met him. His daughter is a friend of mine. She's been a friend of mine for 30 years. So I am almost a family member with this woman. She's 92 herself, so now she's up there too, which makes me not young too, by the way. But anyway, so this is something that you have to examine. Sometimes the memoir that you want to write is not necessarily of your family, but of your extended family, of a friend of a family. Let's say you had somebody that was important, was a famous painter or a musician that used to come and visit your family, and you know them for 30 years, and you might write their memoir. So that's my suggestion. If you do have later on questions, you have my email, and you're gonna find it on on the YouTube program after we finish, and we're gonna stick the email at the end. Some of you people already know to reach me, and thank you for being on this presentation.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us tonight, Tiziano, and giving this wonderful presentation. And I learned a lot from this. I thought it was fascinating. So, and I'm sure our Zoom attendees got a lot out of it as well. So thanks again.
You're
And
welcome.
thank you to our Zoom attendees for being here and asking excellent questions. And as Tiziano said, we will have the program up on YouTube very soon. So I wish everyone a great evening, and thank you again, and good night.
Good night. Good night, everyone.
Ciao.
Ciao, grazie.
Ciao.
Buonanotte.
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 Buonanotte.